Hello. Hello. Hello, my name is Matthew West, and I'm the host of this podcast. It's called the Matthew West Podcast. I really hope you like it.
Hello, his name is Matthew West, and he's the host of this podcast. It's called the Matthew West Podcast. He really hopes you like it.
I really hope you like it.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode, a very special episode of the Matthew West Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew West, and as always, I really hope you like it. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Story House. Today's a special day because today we are celebrating the 4-year anniversary or birthday of the Matthew West Podcast. 4 years ago this month, I had the idea to start this podcast, and what an incredible journey it's been. I want to share with you some of the heart behind why I started this podcast and why it matters to me. But first, I want to just say a special thank you to all of those of you who are out there listening or watching on my YouTube to the podcast. For those who've listened from the very beginning, I see you, I know you, and I'm so thankful for you. For those who are newer to the podcast, man, welcome. I encourage you to go back and listen to some of the older episodes, man, some really cool conversations. So why this podcast, all right? Before we get into some of my favorite moments over the last 4 years, I thought I'd just kind of remind you and remind me of the heart behind this whole show. In this music industry that I live in full time, people can put titles on you, like you're a singer, you're a songwriter, you're a recording artist, or what have you. And I have a lot of different titles, but I think there's been one word that has more adequately or accurately summed up what my heart is and what my desire in life is, and that would be not just singer or recording artist, but communicator. And hopefully that comes through in everything that I do, that I've always felt like the songs are part of what I do. The books are part of what I do, like My Story, Your Glory, which is available now. The podcast is part of what I do, but it's all like in an effort to communicate the message of hope in Jesus Christ to anybody who can hear me, to anybody who would hear me, to anybody who's struggling in their story, to know that there's hope for their story, and that hope is found in a man named Jesus. And so communication has been what I'm passionate about, communicating the message of hope and then hopefully connecting with you through that communication. And so the podcast was born in 2020 when I had, guess what? Nothing but time on my hands. The tour buses were parked for a long time. The COVID pandemic became a force to be reckoned with, and that's putting it mildly, but it brought everything to a screeching halt. With some pretty traumatic effects for so many of us, right? In the life of a musician, it meant staying home off the road. It meant life as I knew it forever, at least for then. It seemed like it was forever changed. And in a lot of ways, I think we can say that season forever changed our world. But during that time, I started to get discouraged. I thought, well, who am I if I can't go on the road? And there was a lot of soul searching that took place. I can't be on stage connecting and communicating with people. And you know what? I began to seek out ways that I could still connect to people, even as we were totally and completely disconnected from each other, right? I felt like we began seeking out community in unique ways. And so I would do a daily quiet time devotion called Quarantine Quiet Time. Remember that word quarantine? Holy cow, how depressing was that? And so I'd go on Instagram every day, Facebook every day, and I took people's prayer requests. And out of that came this idea to start a podcast, just as another way of communicating and connecting, because it seemed like people were enjoying these conversations that I was having. So the Matthew West Podcast was born. Funny story about the name. I sought for months. I tried to find like the best podcast name that I could. I could show you lists of just, this is a clever name. Try this. And I would call my attorney and say, here's the name of the podcast. And then they would go and try to trademark it. And they'd say, sorry, something like that already exists. You can't name it that. And they'd say, but have you ever just thought about naming it, with your own name? And I'd say, no, that's dumb. That's not clever. The songwriter in me wanted something like unique and different. And after months of trying to land on a podcast name, well, you know how that story ends, because 4 years later, it's still the Matthew West Podcast. So Someone once said, "Keep it simple, stupid." And sometimes I forget that. But we landed on the Matthew West podcast, and it's been a blast. We've had so many great moments. We've had tons of great guests as well. Today we're going to visit some of my favorite moments on the podcast and some of your favorite moments as well. But I've got 3 pages, just long lists of guests. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the lists of names. Just to name a few, Mark Hall from Casting Crowns, Max Lucado, one of the greatest authors in history. We had Shawn Johnson, Olympic gymnast. We had Jeremy Camp and his wife, Adrienne Camp. We had, let's see, who else? Lisa Turkhurst has been on the show. Candace Cameron-Bure has been on the show. Some of these guests have been on more than once. Country artist Carly Pierce was a guest on the show. Some of my family members have joined me on the show at different times. We'll get into that later. My good friend Ann Wilson joined us on the show. Levi Lusko has been on the show. Stephen Curtis Chapman. The list is long, and that's literally just the beginning of it. But what I'm kind of blown away as I'm looking at this. Danny Goki, Allie Beth Stuckey, Ellie Holcomb, so many great guests. This is pretty cool. So when I think of these conversations, it's crazy because we've been doing the podcast. Usually we'll do it every week, and it's like they come and go so fast, right? But I want to revisit some of my favorite conversations throughout that. In fact, I'm looking at a name that I like. A conversation that I had with John Acuff, who has written some incredible books that have inspired me and helped me think about how I approach making maximum impact in my life. Let's take just a quick listen to one of these cool moments with my conversation with best-selling author. You need to check out his books, by the way. Check this out, this conversation with John Acuff.
So the 3 questions you ask any of your loudest soundtracks are, number 1, is it true? Is the thing I'm telling myself about myself true? Is the thing I'm telling myself about this situation true? Because one of the greatest mistakes you can make is assuming everything you think is true. And we tend to. We think if I had this thought, it must be fact. The second question you ask is it helpful? Is it helpful when I tell myself this? Does it push me forward or pull me back? And the reality is some things are true, but they're not helpful. An example of that would be maybe your soundtrack is, I don't know how to start a podcast. I don't know how to start a podcast. That might be true. But when you say it to yourself 100 times a day, is it helpful? Does it make you feel good about learning how to start a podcast? Or does it make you put it off for another day? 81% of Americans, according to New York Times, want to write a book. 81%. Every year, less than 1% do. So 81 do it. So the third question you ask is it kind? Is it kind? Would I say this to a friend? And what's been fun about this podcast kind of tour with this book is it changes from a book conversation into a host conversation. We start talking about the host's life. And so like the other day I was on a podcast and I said the is it kind question. And this guy got quiet and he was like, oh no. And I was like, what? And he said, well, I've had the #1 podcast in my category for 9 months. And my soundtrack I've been telling myself is, you're just lucky, you're just lucky, you're just lucky. He said, if a friend came over and they had worked really hard for 9 months on something, I'd never say, you're just lucky. So if I wouldn't say it to them, why am I saying it to me? And what's fun is, so when I share that idea with like a sales organization, it feels soft. Is it kind feels like now we're going to hug and light sage. Like,
right. When
so
they're going, hey, we're looking at our numbers.
Driven. Let's go.
Yeah.
So I pull it back to science. And when you pull it back to science, you see things like Google wondered a few years ago, what are the best teams we have in common? Like, what do our best teams have in common? Because essentially, then how can we teach the other teams how to do that? So they launched something called Project Aristotle, and they spent millions of dollars. They studied 180 different teams and used 35 different statistical models. And the #1 thing the best teams at Google have in common is called psychological safety. And psychological safety means on a team, members of a team can do 3 things. They can ask questions, they can suggest new ideas, and they can admit they're wrong without being treated unkindly. And so kindness is a scientifically proven important part of a team and your own life. Because when you can't treat yourself well, you don't have psychological safety of yourself. Like where, before you even write down an idea, you go, it's dumb. That's a dumb lyric. Why would I even? And you think about the number of songs we've lost, the number of cures for diseases, the business ideas, because somebody thought their idea was too freedom to even write down. And that means you don't have psychological safety as an individual. So that's what's fun about this concept is I can say,
Wow.
here's on an individual level, here's how it's on a teen level.
Yeah.
Like we're writing a book with my 2 teenage daughters about soundtracks for teenagers. Here's how it applies to a corporation.
It's awesome.
Because the reality is culture at a company is just a collection of soundtracks people are listening to at the same time.
Right.
And sometimes they're on purpose, most of the times they're not.
Yeah.
And so that's what's been fun about this idea for me is it's really easy to share and it's really fun to share.
Okay, now we're going to get fired up because these conversations are all different types of emotions. Sometimes I leave like, I'm crying during the show. Sometimes I'm laughing. This next guest has a way of firing me up where I wanted to go run through a brick wall. His name, Tim Tebow. Take a listen to one of my favorite moments from my conversation with Tim Tebow. What does the word conviction mean?
And first, I want to say that emotions don't necessarily always mean bad. But it can be good one day. Your emotions can say, man, I want to help people. I want to serve people. I want to love people. But the next day you can be like, dude, I'm pissed at people. I don't want to. I don't want to get out. I don't want to do it. But what convictions are, to me, it's a deeply rooted set of beliefs. And a lot of times a conviction comes from biblical truth. And so I want to weigh what I believe is my conviction with biblical truth. And it's also what I would say is God's promises. What are God's promises? God's promises are that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that we are one of one, that we're created in love, by love, and for love, that what the angel said, the good news, the great joy, which should be for all the people. It's God's truths over and over and over. We are more than conquerors for him who loved us. Like you could keep going over God's promises. And so you take those promises and then you apply that to your life and then other people's life as well. So then it's like, wait a second. If I believe that what Jesus did on the cross counted for me, and I believe it's for all the people, then it has to count for this person and this person and this person. Then if I believe that all people were created in the image of God and all have worth and value, well, wait a second. Do I treat them as such? And then if you believe that Jesus died for all people and you believe they're all image bearers, they all have worth and value, and then you see hurting people, you know what that leads to? That you better freaking go help them.
Yeah.
Then you better go help them, because if not, what you're really saying to God is, God, I know that you died for them. I know that you love them. I know that they have great worth and value, but they don't have enough worth and value to me to go out of my way to go love and serve them. So really what I'm saying is, yeah, that's probably my mission, but I have more important things to do than what you want me to do. Because if they were important enough for God to send his son to go be the propitiation for us, the payment that satisfies, the ransom for us, if he was willing to be made sin so that we could be made right with him, we're really saying, hey, your sacrifice was awesome, but my time is more awesome than to go love them and serve them.
Okay, now we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. I believe it may have been was he my first episode? Mark Hall from Casting Crowns. The very first episode aired on August 5th, 2020. He also said it was the first podcast interview he'd ever done. I'm not sure that's true. I think he may have just forgotten, but I loved this conversation. This was all about, we were reminiscing actually our final concert together before the pandemic happened. We were together when the world shut down in Trenton, New Jersey on the Only Jesus tour with Casting Crowns. And man, Mark's just the real deal. He's a dear friend of mine. If you know Casting Crowns music, chances are it's ministered to you in a powerful way like it has to me. I've had the honor of writing tons of songs with Mark for the Casting Crowns records, and he's a dear friend. So let's listen to a couple of minutes of this conversation with Mark Hall from Casting Crowns.
Talent and all that stuff is great, but it just doesn't last. People bounce back pretty quick. The world's going to keep on going. And whether or not it remembers me, I just don't know if that helps anybody. It's a humbling thought to know that I had a guy come up to me in Walmart and he said, man, I want to thank you for one of your songs. It just changed my life. And he couldn't think of the name of it. I was like, okay. And he goes, what was that song about God? And how much he loves us? And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, is it Who Am I? And he goes, no. And I thought, okay, that kind of stung a little bit. That was a good song. And he never thought of the name of it. We went back and forth for a while.
I love that.
He finally just said, man, I can't remember what it was, but I just remember hearing it and knowing that I was at a time in my life when I was really deciding some things. And Your song pushed me to God and pushed me to the Word. But this is what's happening now. And this is who I am now.
Wow.
I don't remember your song, but this is what God's doing. And that immediately made me walk out of there thinking of all the people that poured into me that I'd totally forgotten poured into me.
Yes.
All of those little small group leaders that sat there and talked to the top of my head because I was just playing with my shoes as a teenager, and all those people talking to my rolling eyes, and all of those that don't even know they mattered.
Wow.
But what they said stuck.
Yes.
And it formed in me.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't think we walk around wanting to be remembered.
Man.
But we have to understand there are moments when you're not the point.
Yes.
And you got to make sure you're pointing to the point.
I love that. Also going to bring it back now to this was actually the top streamed podcast that we've had in the last 4 years. This episode actually came in 2020 as well. Inspiring individual Priscilla Shire. And you might have seen her in movies. Like I think she was in, is it The Prayer Room? Is that what that was called? The War Room. War Room. That's right. But she talks in this episode. She says, your history may have marked you, but it is not authorized to label you. Whoo, that's powerful. So I want you to check out a few moments of, this is the most streamed episode in the history of the Matthew S. podcast. Priscilla Shire. Let's listen for a couple minutes.
And the main thing that materialized for me is this idea of strategy in prayer and intentionality. So I'd always believed in prayer itself, but in terms of being strategic about what I'm praying
Right.
and applying God's promises, see, that takes forethought. That means that you've looked into the Bible to see what promises actually apply to the things I'm praying about so that I can weave those promises into what I'm literally audibly saying when I pray so that I can write them down and refer back to these promises as I continue to pray for that kid or for that issue in my marriage or my finances or health. So that means I've thought about it beforehand. I'm not just sort of throwing a prayer up against the wall and hoping it sticks. I'm thoughtful about what I'm praying, and I want the enemy to hear me calling out God's promises as I'm praying. So I became more strategic in prayer and more intentional about writing down the prayer requests that I'm praying. And the reason why is because, and this is what I wanted to get to, one of the spiritual disciplines that has impacted me the most and encouraged me the most, Matthew, is writing down my prayers and the things that God is doing in my life. Because when I go back and look, there is a track record of God's faithfulness that I would not have had I not written it down.
Yeah.
Because you don't remember what you prayed 7 years ago.
No.
But when you are living in answers, you are so blinded by God's blessing and goodness that unless you go back to that moment where you felt deficient and where you felt like you had to ask the question to begin with, you stop recognizing, I stop recognizing the ongoing faithfulness of God in our lives to not only hear our prayers, but to respond to them in His timing. So that's been one of the things that's encouraged me the most, is writing down my interactions with God.
While we're only revisiting a couple of minutes of our favorite conversations, I encourage you, if you get some time, go back, find that episode and listen to it in its entirety. It'll blow you away. It's awesome. All right, now I want to go and listen to a little bit of a conversations that I've had with some of my family members. Mrs. Emily West has been on the show. You know her. You love her. Let's listen back to one of my conversations with Emily West. Speak to any of the parents out there who maybe, regardless of their situation, where they have a graduate, wherever they are in their 18 summers, what would your encouragement be to the parents out there today?
My encouragement would just be to, I know this sounds, but like put your phone down and soak it up. You know what I mean? Like get them off their phone, get them outside. You know, we laugh a lot of times. You'll ask one of our girls to go for a walk and I'm like, tell them they're taking a walk with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make them go with you because they're going to look back one day and be glad they did. And so will you. So soak it up.
Soak it up. On that, there she goes. Well, one of my good friends, Ann Wilson, has had quite a story to tell, and God has used her music in such a big way. She's one of our favorite episodes of the Matthew S. podcast as well, has had many downloads to this episode. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this clip with our good friend, Ann Wilson.
that is one of my biggest missions, is to be a good role model for girls. And I think that the whole album of Rebel is stating what it means to be a follower of Jesus in the world that we live in today, which is so rare. Like, it's actually so rare. And when people talk about faith, when we talk about our faith or Jesus, it's like we're almost shoved away. Like, we're not supposed to talk about
or
it.
Am I going to get canceled? Or
Totally. But then all these other subjects and all these other topics, you
you
can talk about and scream it from the rooftops, and you're fine and you're praised. And it's because this world is so sinful that when you're walking with Jesus, it's like we are the outsiders. And so I think especially in my generation and Gen Z, like, there's such brokenness, and I think kids my age feel like they can't talk about their faith, or they don't have faith, or they're like lost in trying to find faith. And I just felt this calling like deep in my bones that like I was supposed to go out into the world and share the message of the gospel. And for me, it was doing it through music, because it's what I do. And so I just felt it. And ever since like this album has come out and stuff, I just keep like, I'll flip open my Bible to a random page, or I'll like see something, and it's this constant like reminder that God keeps showing me through scripture of, I'm calling you to go out into the world and proclaim and share my message with people.
That's it.
And so it's like, you're going to get pushed back. You know, I've already gotten pushed back. You're going to get moments of like doubt. And it's because it's hard to put out a country album that is all about Jesus, because it's not something that, you know, people do. But there's such so many rewarding moments throughout it. And
there's no
I'm proud of
last
it.
night we let the liquor talk on this record.
There's not.
Well, this has been fun, like revisiting some episodes over the last 4 years. I want to bring it back. This is a conversation that I had not too long ago with my daughter Lulu upon her graduating from high school. And she said some pretty cool things that kind of floored me. It's kind of moments when I realized that maybe your daughter is going to be teaching you some things. You know, I've been so focused on trying to teach her throughout her life that you start to realize God has his hand on her life, and she's teaching me a thing or two. So I want you to listen to this really beautiful statement that Lulu had to make about the scary things in life, and really, really powerful stuff. Let's go to the Story House with Lulu West. That could be a senior quote.
It should have been, but I didn't see it in time.
It's bigger and it's scarier, but it's much better for swimming.
And, you know, I waited till very last minute to pick which college I was going to. But when I saw that on Instagram, I just like immediately in my mind went to college decision, you know, because I didn't want to pick a small school and feel like I was limited in like my opportunities. And like, I mean, everybody talks about how like Nashville and like my school is just like a little bubble, you know, and then you get into like the real world and it's kind of like a culture shock. So then I was like, am I ready to go to a big school and have that culture shock and be like, wow, this is like what the real world is like and all the things, or stay like on the tiny, like small school surrounded by good, God-loving people, and still like not really get out of like my comfort zone. So that's kind of what I was praying about. Like, I don't know which path to go on. Both, like, I know the Lord orders my steps, so both would be amazing. But then when I saw that on Instagram, I was like, it's bigger and it's scarier, but the opportunities are insane. You know what I mean? Like going to a big school, because I'm going to UT. Hello, go Vols. But I'm learning to say that more.
Go Vols. Okay.
But going to a big school, like, yes, it's scary, but when you place the decision in the Lord's hands, he makes the scary become beautiful, because you're able to only see the opportunities to tell the Lord about, or to tell others about the Lord. Like, that's the Great Commission, you know? And like, I am so blessed to have been like involved in such a good youth group in such a good school, surrounded by people that are walking with me in my faith. And that would be such an amazing opportunity to continue that in college, being only surrounded by people that love Jesus. But the opportunities are crazy to get to go and tell people about Jesus. Like, I have a reason why I have breath in my lungs today, you know what I mean? And other people might not know what that means for them.
Well, hey, thanks for letting me stroll down memory lane with you, and thank you for listening to the Matthew West podcast. It's been a great joy. I sure love doing this type of communication and this podcast with you. It means a lot to me. I'm looking forward to the journey ahead with you. We've got some really cool things planned for the Matthew West podcast. I hope you'll keep coming back to the Story House with me. In the meantime, I want you to remember that God has a plan for your life. He's the author of all stories, the finisher of your faith, And when you trust him and put the pen in his hands, he will write an incredible story with your life. At the turn of the new year, we're going to do a special journey together through the My Story, Your Glory devotional book. So if you don't have your hands on a copy of that, go pick up a copy and be ready, because we're going to do a book club together with the My Story, Your Glory devotional book right here at the Matthew West Podcast. But we've got some great guests coming up the rest of this year. I hope you'll join me. Tell your friends. If you've enjoyed the podcast, be sure to leave a review and 5 stars and all those 6 stars if you want. If you can find a 6-star, bring it our way. Thank you for letting my music, letting my books, my podcast be part of your life. And remember, it's your story for his glory. I'll see you next week. He's my dad. He gives good advice, and that's why the last segment of our show is called Dad Advice. Listen to his theme song and get pumped.
He is my dad, and he gives good advice. And that's why this segment is called Dad Advice.
Dad, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Send us out with something today. What you got?
All right. We've been talking about don't stop praying, and this one will fire us up. And also Don't Stop Praying made number 1. How awesome is that? And what a powerful song and message. So today, don't stop praying for chains to break. Chains keep us in bondage. They steal us of freedom and drain our joy. This is why Satan wants to keep us in chains. And we're all familiar with them. Chains of fear, chains from our past, chains of addiction, chains of guilt. Everyone is either struggling to be free or knows someone who is. So don't stop praying. When we struggle, we feel hopeless. When we see others struggle, we feel helpless. And I don't know, 2 words I don't like are the most: hopeless and helpless. But the good news is there is hope in Christ. Jesus has come to set the prisoners free. And a great scripture, spiritual truth, is from the life of Paul and Silas. Chains fell off while they were in prison. They fell off when they were singing praises to God. Acts 16, I love to go to this chapter and read about Paul and Silas. And here they were in a dark, deep dungeon, probably thinking this is it. They're going to die. And it says about midnight, Paul and Silas. So midnight. And we often use midnight as very dark hours. And it's hard to do anything but be in fear and wonder how bad things are going to be. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. My dad advice today, 4 things. 1, don't stop praying. Begin to sing praises to God just like Paul and Silas. 2, don't stop standing on the promises of God. Stay in his word. Luke 1:37, nothing's impossible with God. John 8:36, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. Psalm 40 verse 2, he lifted me out of a slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Thirdly, don't stop believing for a miracle. Expect God to act. Fourthly, don't stop reaching out for the help and support you need. The bottom line is God is breaking chains today.
Come on. That's good. One time I sang at a prison, and while I was singing, one of the inmates raised his hand and interrupted my show, and he's like, I just feel the Lord wants me to read a scripture. And I was like, okay. And he started reading the scripture about how the chains were breaking. I thought there was about to be like a jailbreak, but everybody started cheering about the prison doors open, and I was like, oh Lord, help me. But that's a powerful message and a reminder that we do have a God who breaks chains. That'd be a good song, Chain Breaker. Somebody should write that one.
Yeah, well, you should.
Yeah, maybe. A little too late for that. Thanks,
I should
Dad.
write that.